Morning, all who are here and listening. And we're again here to talk about sanity effectively and life on life's terms, and noting that if we are free of compulsive habits, impulsive habits, and reactive habits, which all fall under the same banner, we're generally looking at obsessive habits and or tendencies that become clearer as a result of not being preoccupied with trying to escape into some form of other fascination: drugs, alcohol, sex, gambling, etc. And this conversation is not limited to people who have those admitted conditions or qualities that they're struggling with and or have recovered from, but includes anyone who entertains ideas about their thinking that aren't true and then wonder why they struggle. If the thinking we do is primary to our survival, then thinking incorrectly about our thinking and thinking the incorrect thinking is correct would certainly cause great upheaval and disturbance in our own experience. And noticing that disturbance, beginning to actually witness that experience, because we've been witnessing it, but witnessing it not as something to get over and get away from, but something to simply concede that we must be doing right now. Whether we should or shouldn't be doing it is irrelevant to what we're doing now. Because if I'm all of a sudden thinking I shouldn't be doing what I'm doing while I'm doing what I'm doing, I've created a collision that's impossible. It's like wrestling an exact replica of my own body, my own brain, my own talent, my own ability to wrestle. And I'm not a wrestler, but I'm using this as an example. If I've chosen to wrestle my seeming self, I've got a perfect match that I'm constantly fighting, thinking somehow I'll get over on it, when in fact, every time I get over on it, it gets over on me. And it creates this relentless inner struggle that does not go away. And I would suggest humanity has been struggling with this since the beginning of the development of rational thought, which probably wasn't that rational. It just seemed to be rational enough to get us by in newer ways, but also created a very caustic, antagonistic, pretentious, interreactive tendency amongst humans to condemn and use self-righteous indignation effectively to oppress and suppress and kill other people because of what they're thinking. And war is largely based on that. It's just Winston Churchill said that war is a failure of diplomacy, and diplomacy by its nature is the ability to come to terms verbally, come to terms with ideas. So if we're misinformed about the ideas we have and acting as though we are well-informed, there's a good chance we're going to feel deformed in some way, or we need reform, something to reshape the thinking we're doing. So that's what we talk about. We do it as a group because in my experience, doing it with people one-on-one, which I did for years, gave them one aspect of this conversation, but doing it in a group openly, being listened to by others wherever they want to listen, gives us all a chance to think about what we do socially as central to the potential we have to influence and offer and give the totality of what we have in a spiritual, absolute, infinite way. To begin to notice if we have that and we talk in those terms and share in those terms, there's a good chance that people who equally have that will begin to speak and think in those terms and align rather than be further maligned by the reactive tendency of me telling you what to do. So that's not what I'm here for. I'm not here to tell you anything that you don't already know, but I'm here to remind, literally bring mind back into our thinking awareness about a state of being that is all-knowing and ever-present and naturally the presence of the present right now. So if we aim on that or look at that, it's really what we're doing now, what we're thinking now that causes any of the potential conflicts that we have. Good morning, Lenses.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Jack.
Good to see you and have you here.
Thank you.
I was just giving a brief introduction, but I was ending on the point that it's what we do now that impacts our experience always, because there's nothing ever happening that isn't present. Everything that's happening, even though we can have concepts of a past and concepts of a future and concepts that lying works and concepts that we have to hide, and all that we can keep secrets, all those things are concepts of thought. They're not real, they're not true, because if I think I'm keeping a thought, I'm nervous about it. So the nervousness is actually the admission of the thinking that I'm doing. I'm nervous and anxious, and I'm afraid I'm going to get caught. I wouldn't be afraid if I was actually hiding the thing I was thinking was hidden. So there's an immediacy of our experience that is inescapable, because the present is where life is, in its essence, not in the way we talk about life being human life and my life and your life, but life is an absolute source that preceded any animals or humans or any of the other evolutionary or procedurally developed forms that we look at today, human life forms and plants and trees and animals and all that stuff, including the fish. So that's all developed and within a relative experience that we're having. And if the absolute is absolute, then it isn't something we need to get to. It's something that is already the essence of our life existence that isn't based in a form, but we have forms, human bodily forms that we've been given, and each of us is responsible for. And not only are we responsible for our own bodily form and the choices we make and the decisions we come to and the conclusions, but also everyone else's and everything else, because that responsibility isn't divisible if it's natural. If it's the essence of essence, it's just the natural state of being that has us able to, it's like we've been put in the cockpit of a plane at 30,000 feet and somebody says, fly the plane. It would be a big responsibility for all those on board and the pilot and co-pilot to function adequately, to function usefully, to function in ways that would replicate the ability of the plane to function, to mirror it, to be able to use it. Our bodies are those things for us. They're our vehicles, our transport. So if we're straightening our thinking out, we're also admitting maybe it's been bent, maybe it's been twisted, maybe it's been wrapped around ideas that have been inconceivable. And so we feel it's inconceivable that there is any other idea. So we get almost locked in place, kind of preoccupied, not only kind of, but feeling we are preoccupied. I hear people say, I get stuck in my head, I'm stuck in my thinking. All those things can't be true if thoughts are constantly changing. We can think it's true because we're fixated on that thinking, fixated on that thought. So we come to that conclusion, which then serves the point of our being stuck. And it's what we're causing that we're using to excuse that we're victims to what's happening as though it's not being caused by us. So it's beginning to see that it isn't what I say here, it's what each of us do with what is said by all of us. If we hear things that we disbelieve, it doesn't mean they're not valuable. It just means that our thinking is reacting. If my thinking is defensive, I know that I'm going to react to ideas that don't agree with it. And that happens to me every day to some degree. This isn't a conversation trying to dismiss the potential for that and say it shouldn't be happening, I'm never going to do it again, and I've got to stop thinking, which is interesting, which people often say in this discussion is, you're asking me not to think. And I said, isn't it interesting that we've been thinking obsessively so long that we think obsessive thinking is all thinking is supposed to be doing? When in fact, if that's the case, we wouldn't be obsessed at all. We'd just be thinking. We wouldn't worry about it. We wouldn't be struggling with it. We wouldn't cause anxious disorders, nervous disorders, and metabolic disorders as a result of it. It would be natural because it would be the only thing we could do, which shows that there are options. And within cause and effect, this material world that we seem to be navigating, my thinking immediately causes an effect. So thought doesn't manifest reality, thought manifests effects that seem real when I think the thinking is real. If I think the basis of my existence is on thought that's absolutely real every time I have a thought, I wouldn't struggle at all. I would be performing enormously more functional results than I do today. Because I would be aligned with, I would know exactly what to do at every moment, and I would do things that would function immediately. because I wouldn't be sidetracked by the numbness I've created to that greater awareness by making believe I'm in control of a self that's out of control, or seems to be out of control, or even seems to be a self that it has any control or can be out of control. So it's a conversation about sanity and seeing that sanity is not insane, that nature is sane because it's based on reality rather than supposed ideas. Think of posing, impositions, or thoughts that we have taken positions on that are contrary to reality. And the imposition is a weight that becomes depressing over time if we chronically maintain those things. Our body absorbs the shock of these experiences. And I would call that present traumatic stress disorder. It isn't something that's coming from the past, it's happening in the present. And the question is, if I'm doing it now, and I'm free to do it now, why do I think there's nothing else I can do but continue to do it? If I weren't sick in my thinking to imagine I had no other choice, to undo what I normally do, to not redo, to not repeat, to not re-stimulate this experience of anxiety and stress. So that question is present. What are we doing here? What are we doing now? It's never anywhere else. So when you're not here as you consider some of these thoughts, it may give you a little bit of insight that's disturbing as you begin to notice that you actually watch your thoughts. When I think I am my thoughts, I think I'm in my thoughts, so I can't watch my thoughts because I think I'm a victim to my thoughts. It's kind of crazy, literally. But in considering thoughts that are talking about reality as simply being real and truth simply being true, without any further complication of words to define it in some way that then makes it seem arguable and defensible or in need of offense to be able to protect against someone else's thought that's somewhat contrary because the words get out of order, reality as reality becomes a very stable thought. And to be able to think of that is to see that a contemplative state of meditation is our normal state. And all we inflict on that normal state of peace and quiet and calm is a consequence, an effect of thoughts that are considering things to be real that aren't real at all. So the disturbance itself is telling us, it's our body saying something's wrong with what you're thinking. It's giving us guidance. It's like standing in a mirror. We get to see exactly our feelings tell us why people say I feel bad, I feel less than, I feel insecure, I feel vulnerable. They're defining their thinking. They're not defining who they are, but what they're doing with their body, their choices they're making. So I don't know if I've repeated that in every introduction, but I have a different sense of things every day in terms of the capacity to express them. And my aim in being here is to get better at talking about this and talking about it in less confusing terms. And I think I can go off in directions that I'm working on, which seem a little bit elusive because I've been at this a while and I want to share what's happening with me, but I may miss the opportunity to connect with everyone else in a way that is more meaningful or more useful. So I would like to do that. So good morning.
Morning.
Good to see you back, Lenses and Mark.
Good morning.
So thoughts. What are we going to do with the time we have?
Responsibility.
So discuss responsibility in an absolute sense?
Yes, please. Responsibility, truth, and the absolute.
So give us, Jenna, you had quite an experience with that a year and a half or two ago that struck you while you were not during the time we were spending together, but it seemed to me it was sort of in the middle of the week where it sort of landed and you thought, oh, oh, I am responsible.
Yeah, I was in my kitchen doing dishes because I love doing them by hand because it's meditative for me. And I was having compulsive thoughts because I'm a numbers person and I can re-go over the numbers. And it happened to be the numbers of something that was an illusion, but it was something that cost me a lot of money, over $1 million. And I was going through the numbers, and then all of a sudden it just popped. I started laughing, and it popped into my head that not one tiny iota of anything ever that's happened to me in my life that I wasn't responsible for it, because I'm responsible for my reactions to other people's actions. But mine even went deeper than that, because the decisions that I made resulted in that perceived loss. And I mean, it was a 9 or 10-year-old loss at that point. And I knew those numbers like, on the back of my hand. I could just go through them just for lack of anything better to do. Like, I got screwed on that, blah, blah, blah. And I started laughing, and I thought, wow, if I am responsible for everything, I can't even have a resentment or a story. There's nothing to attach to it. It's all just an illusion. And it was like bone deep, 100%. I felt it, that I knew, and everything was really light. And I think I called you crying and laughing at the same time. And I was on a pink cloud for like 2 months. And then it hit me that if I'm responsible for everything, then I'm responsible for any of the ugly, mean, or bad too. And that was a little bit of a downtrodden time. But then I kind of rested into neutrality, the neutrality of the fact that if I start those compulsive thoughts again, that there's no argument. I can't bring a co-conspirator in, because the truth's already been revealed to me that I am responsible, not like 98%, not 50%, that every single thing from the second I was incarnated, it's all my responsibility. I can make choices, and my choice is to not create chaos that's unnecessary. And it was hard. It's been hard because I'm an addict and I miss the highs and the lows. But I love the neutrality, and I've learned, you've helped me learn to rest in that, and that, I don't know, an awe in that of its own right that doesn't require the parade.
Yeah. Well, and it also, I think the point you made that's interesting and well worthy of note is that, for instance, when I was relieved of the obsession to drink and use drugs, I had the freedom to see that the problem had never been the drinking and the drugging, but the actual thinking that led me to the point that I was so miserable that I thought the only solution was to try to feel better all the time.
Right.
And that's what struck me in the first 6 months of being sober. This is 36 years ago. And I realized, the book says it's a mental problem. Well, if I can make believe that something that is untrue is true by making believe that I can control and enjoy something that I consistently never controlled when I enjoyed and never enjoyed when I controlled, I am perfectly capable of lying and making believe it's true. In the simplest sense. And I don't know, we can think of all the times we've done it, or we can simply think of the concept itself and include everything we've ever done, including the things we don't even remember doing. And beginning to see that clearly, like you're describing, Jana, actually comes with, I had a sick stomach for a while. I threw up a gob of acidic mucus that had been sitting in my stomach since I was a kid, that I'm sure was all the nervousness and all those things it was a bodily sensation that was developed to mimic the acidic approach I had to, or caustic approach I had to my thinking. But in saying that, it's worth noting that awareness is actually us getting better. When we're feeling worse, we're starting to feel things that are bad, and to feel those things accurately is to align with them, to have them, to allow them, to concede them, to surrender per se to them. Because the reason they're there is I've been fighting them, thinking I shouldn't have them, wouldn't have them if it wasn't for this, that, and the other. Rather than see that I've never bothered to spend the present simply facing what's happening. And it doesn't mean for me that I don't have
and we've been working with the Israeli government,
Anthony.
to the restoration of flow.
Yeah.
Troops.
It doesn't mean I can't take positions that create a sense of imbalance. But if I take the position and feel the imbalance, I know it's what I'm doing in my thinking that's causing that. So I don't try to avoid that at all costs. I start seeing that that's what challenges are. That's what opportunities are. That's what growth can be in terms of my functional capacity as a human being. And my body, if it's giving me body language about these sensations and I'm denying to listen to it, I'm literally functionally illiterate in my own thinking because I'm acting like I can't read the signs. The anxiety, the suffering, the struggling, the sense of being a victim, the spite I have for others, the clarity I seem to have. I am an expert in what's wrong with everybody else, but I suffer with the admission of what's wrong in my own thinking very often. Not a coincidence there. It's an attempt to bring balance to something that's out of balance by making believe I see everyone else and everything else clearly in what's wrong. I make believe that the imbalance that I am causing isn't something I'm doing and I can avoid it. That isn't a fully healthy, realized, when we talk about self-actualization and self-realization, actually realizing what's happening as it's happening, not as I think it's happening, but as it's happening, which my feelings are giving me the effect. Thoughts manifest effects. They don't manifest reality. If the thoughts are manifesting effects, it's like standing in front of a mirror and not liking the outfit I'm wearing. If I argued with the mirror to take it off and change it, that would seem stupid, but it's exactly what I'm doing in my own thinking when I think I shouldn't be thinking what I'm thinking, and I think as a result, I shouldn't be thinking it, so I think if I don't think I'm thinking it, I'm better, and all of a sudden wonder why it seems impossible to stop it because I think I have nothing to do with it because it's nothing I want anything to do with. It all adds up. I start thinking it's impossible to stop. Why? I don't even think I have anything to do with it. Of course I'm going to think it's impossible to stop. I don't want to admit I'm the one starting it. Now.
I relate. I was going to say, I relate.
Part of Jana's comment is that when we're dealing in absolute terms, which is the essence of our existence, these aren't optional, negotiable things. They're not more or less. They're not here or not there. They're absolute present states of being all the time. That's our natural state. That's who we are in essence. Not me, not you, but we, all of us. It isn't a divisible essence any more than the universe has managed to divide it. It still seems to be working everywhere within the universe on the basis that the universe is still working to allow us to even have this conversation. So thinking in absolute terms is just beginning to see, oh, that's the problem. This isn't something I need to get to. It's the thinking I'm struggling with that gives me the impression that I'm not there. If I think my thinking is reality, I immediately think I don't belong where I am. And so I go searching for this other place that I never seem to find because it's always where I am. Where am I going to find it if I constantly think I'm not where it is? It's like giving somebody directions and never asking them where they are. They call on the phone and say, how do I get to your house? You don't even bother to ask, where are you? That's what we're doing in our own experience. Anthony, excuse me.
Anthony, I'm trying to mute. It says it's on mute, but maybe it's not.
No, you had some background noise that I muted. Sounded like a radio or something.
Yeah, sorry. It said mute on my screen, but I guess it wasn't. I don't know why.
So you were, I think, trying to say something.
No, actually, I wasn't. Sorry.
Oh.
I think it was me. I was going to speak.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mark.
Yeah. So the struggle that I relate with the responsibility that she was talking about over the last 2 weeks, I'm happy that I've gotten to the point of realizing that it is my responsibility which has helped a lot with resentments, as you stated. But I've been beating myself up for 2 weeks about my responsibility. Again, now I didn't lose on this time. It wasn't about monetary things. It was about time. And how much, not sticking to my boundaries with somebody and saying yes to something that, was against what my boundaries I had set. And, and so I've just been spending a lot of time in my head or whatever, beating myself up for not sticking to my boundaries, because I am accepting that responsibility that I'm the one who said yes, even though I had said no to the person 200 times. And the 201st time I said yes.
That a boy.
Excuse me?
That a boy.
Yeah. And, it ended up costing me time.
Yes.
Time that I can't get back, time that where I would be today, time, as far as what I wanted to accomplish in that time, needed different weather pattern than it is now. And it's, I handled it last week. Finally, I spoke up. And
so it sounds to me that you have the impression, as a result of what you're thinking, that you wouldn't be where you are now if it weren't for those situations.
Correct.
Okay, so let me ask you, where are you now?
I am right where I'm supposed to be.
Well, whether you're supposed to be
reality
or not,
right here.
where are you? Yeah. So again, it isn't that we can't have those thoughts, but those thoughts cause effects. They manifest effects that give us impressions. If there's reality doesn't make impressions. Reality is like light. It's absolute. There's like no weight to it. You notice how much light is around us? There doesn't seem to be any weight because we walk through it and in it all the time. Doesn't seem to obstruct us. Oxygen tends to be the obstruction. Even oxygen creates friction. Light doesn't seem to do that. There's a little bit of essence to it, but light, by its nature, its reality is its speed, its constant speed. It isn't because it's here now, it's present wherever it is all the time. It isn't like it goes away everywhere else because it happens to be here. So it isn't that coming or going. But you're describing, Mark, very much what Jana saw and started to come to terms with. And a couple of things I'm going to suggest, if you want to hear them.
Please.
And if you don't, I'm going to go ahead anyhow. When you say it's my responsibility, you're again thinking you're alone in this world and it's all up to you. But what I just mentioned about Jana's insight was that it's not only her responsibility 100%, it's also mine. And it's also yours. And it's everyone and everything. Look at how well everything that doesn't think is cooperating with us right now to allow this conversation to be going on. The oxygen, the light, the electricity. There's a huge, billions of different things interacting, probably trillions, to make this moment that we're having possible. Probably not even trillions. It's probably a number so big that math can't even quantify them. And they're all happening identically, simultaneously, right now, collectively, to provide this present state. So if the things we think we regret, with all the stories you tell about the guy the 201st time and all that stuff are the problem, we're trying to assign it to something that isn't even happening, right? It's over. It's done. You made the choice. You're not making the choice now if you don't want to make the choice again. But you're thinking about who you are as based in what you think, to have a self that you're abusing. Think of the self you'd be abusing. Abuse is abnormal use. What's abnormal use? It's what an allergy is. An allergy is an abnormal reaction. What does it mean? The thing that we do, you get poison ivy and you scratch it thinking you're going to solve it and it spreads it. So most allergies have, sane allergies tell us what not to do. Peanut allergies, for instance. People who have peanut allergies do not get near peanuts. They know they're going to die. They know they're going to suffocate. But we've concocted ways of trying to feel better about what's worse and think because we feel better that we've solved the problem, when in fact we're treating the effect rather than the actual cause. So it slowly grows behind the scene in this seeming subconscious. We get caught off guard. We find ourselves doing things that my sense is the 201st time you made that choice, you were trying to get your attention. You were trying to set limits that you thought your life depended on, and if everybody obeyed them, everything would be fine. And you keep finding that nobody listens, and nobody notices an invisible fence that you set up. So they keep trotting on your lawn, your garden, yourself. And if thinking of itself is who we think is us, that isn't who we are. That's what we think. What would thinking of itself produce? That's a question.
What would thinking of itself produce? It would produce more thoughts.
Very good. So if you think who you are is what you think you are obsessive thoughts. You think managing obsessive thoughts defines you. And by denying them in some way and pretending you don't have them as bad as you had them once, by feeling better about them, that you've gotten rid of them while they are brewing, which you hear in sobriety a lot, says, my disease is doing push-ups when I'm sleeping, right? We're admitting that we're proactively engaged in thinking that is absolutely not true, under the guise it is true, and saving us from a dilemma that we keep recreating by making believe we're going to get better by denying what we're doing. That is insanity, plain and simple. Doesn't mean we can't do it. It doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. It means if we're doing it and we see what we're doing accurately, we then have clarity to witness what is depressing and what is disturbing and what is discomforting and what is wrong, and start to say, wow, I seem to be doing things I don't even think I'm doing to be creating this effect. And then in this concept of responsibility is to start to see people as also struggling with the exact same thing. And rather than blame them for being idiots and manipulative and liars, which we all seem to be good at figuring out who the liars are while we're lying, seem to be really good at that, just like I mentioned about seeing the wrong in others so clearly, what they did, rather than noticing it's what I'm thinking that has me so keenly interested in trying to create a counterbalance to this lopsided idea that I have that has no balance, doesn't have any balance. It's simply a position I've taken that creates an imposition, which is depressing in time. It builds up in my body. So if I justify it immediately, what's going to happen 10 minutes down the road? I'm going to be better at justifying it if I can't and don't come to terms with it. And it's not that I can't, it's that I think I can't, so that I can continue to maintain, redo, repeat, and then think because it has such a sense of permanence that it is real, and see, I told you. And just have more of the same looping insanity filling my experience.
It's familiar.
Sounds familiar.
Well, because it is familiar. My body knows that anxiety feeling, and I can conjure it up at any given time. It's a choice. If I want to feel like that feeling, I can make it happen.
Well, I would say that to any degree we aren't fully realized or fully actualized, we're still doing it to some degree thinking it's normal because it's not as abnormal as we used to do it. And in a telescope up in space, when the Hubble thing was originally sent up there, one of them, I forget if it was Hubble or not, but they had to go make a repair on Hubble because there was a slight deviation in the mirror.
Yeah.
And a speck of dust on a telescope destroys the telescope's ability to be honest about what it's seeing, because all of a sudden it has an obstruction that's immediate to the viewer. And when you're looking, I don't know how many miles the telescope looks out into, but as far as it can look, if something close to your eye is tiny, it appears to be huge. when you're in that vastness. So any obstruction in our own seeing, what I'm talking about seeing now is a third eye component or an absolute seeing, an understanding component would be as close as I can gauge that humans have. Understanding is how we see substance. We don't tend to think our eyes can't see because we don't see where the nerves connect to the brain or where our food goes when we eat it. We just presume it's going to our stomach and going to provide nourishment for us. And yet when it comes to seeming spiritual matters, we think it's all gobbledygook to even discuss something that can't be seen as being fantasy, and not recognizing that most of what we base our daily operations on is completely invisible to the eyesight, to the senses. But our senses are designed to reckon with forms that are based in substance. And if our ultimate substance is an absolute source, then it's something we all share, so we're all 100% responsible. And it takes the weight off of you, Mark, and me, and Jana, and everyone, to think it's something we're doing alone, rather than start to see we're actually all responsible by nature, because we wouldn't exist. The existence itself, if we can even ask whether we're responsible, because it's a confirmation that we exist. We have the capacity to even imagine not being responsible. We're responsible for the imagination. So irresponsible thoughts doesn't make us irresponsible. It makes our choices irresponsible. It makes our actions in that direction, our thoughts, irresponsible. That's all. But when we think we're our thoughts, we think we become irresponsible, and other people are irresponsible. And I am damned now because I'm threatening my life by an irresponsible choice I made, and I can't get it out of my head. One single choice you made. When did you make that choice, Mark?
4 months ago.
So you fought 200 times, and the 201st is stuck with you for 4 months. Now, that's all happening in the present. It's not happening 4 months ago. That's all a concept of your memory acting as though there's some other place that thing happened, and some other place you can go back and change.
Yeah, I mean, it was stuck with me for 4 months because I was caregiving for something for 4 months.
Yeah.
They asked me to caregive for something, but what's on my mind right now is a little bit of what you just mentioned briefly. I'd like to talk more or hear more about thought versus action, or action versus thought.
Thought is an action, and it's often missed as a primary action. If something happens, it's an action, right? Like in an absolute source, there's nothing happening, because it's just the present state of consciousness or beingness, which is often referred to as nothingness, though it's actually everythingness, which includes nothingness for all possibility. All possibility. And that's where we presently are. We are in the face of all possibility. If we begin speaking in those terms, we begin confirming reality in our own actions, which starts with a thought. Because if the thought's thinking about absolute nature being absolute, all of a sudden we start talking in terms that will catch us seemingly off guard, because we're noticing, we're looking beyond the limits of the defenses we're creating, starting to notice that beyond, you said you really are upset that you didn't maintain the boundaries. The boundaries are all just thoughts that are limited, that you think are you and right and real, and the only thing you can do, because they put you at risk to do anything less than that. You've been beating yourself up, self-abusing yourself, abnormally relating to yourself as something to beat up, to think that punishing that thing will get you better. Thinking that there's anything to punish is the problem. It's starting to see that our fantasy is turned into reality for us. And that's a problem with reality. It puts us at odds with everything all the time. So spending 4 months regretting something is evidence of how far we'll go to try to prove the thought is right and real, and how long we last and are durable. Think of the durability of our experience to impose this false emergency, this present traumatic stress on our bodies that are depleted in their ability to function and still survive for the most part. We've grown as a species in light of this. in the face of this. It's pretty remarkable. It certainly shows, in my estimation, that our natural instincts, even when we're reversing them and acting in the exact opposite way, are still functioning, because that's the nature of our human existence, to survive and thrive, to be abundant, to express abundance rather than scarcity. If you're defining yourself as limited thoughts and think you need to maintain those boundaries, you're thinking there's nothing beyond those boundaries, because that defines your life. If everything begins at the end of the limit, then just beginning to look beyond the limits of your thinking, just like the horizon, when it was finally realized to be the beginning of everything else, the sailors knew that beyond it, they'd find something. More than thinking there was nothing there. They started looking beyond it. They started sailing toward it. And the irony about the horizon is you can never achieve it. You can never reach it. It's always further out on a sphere. It's always somewhere else. But in the meantime, they started seeing things beyond what they thought was there. And the things they found were pretty awe-inspired and pretty miraculous. Tahiti, tea, all the tea in China they discovered. All that stuff that seemed to be beyond the comprehension or their ability to comprehend had been there the whole time. So if that's true in that regard, then what we're talking about here is true, if it's true, in every regard, right now. If we talk about it in the present, because it's the only time we ever say anything, it's the only time we ever think anything, if our thinking is aligned with reality, we're going to be, again, expressing intuitively, intuition defined as knowledge beyond reason, what we know in terms of existence, and start saying things that are functionally literate for everyone else to hear and act on too. Because as Katie and I were talking, Katie just showed up, and we were talking on the way out to the desert the other day about how kids, there was a woman who wrote an article. It was one of the only articles ever published by the AMA, or American Medical Association, in their book. And she had done a study about kids. And she said kids don't listen to adults because they listen to kids. If a kid starts riding a bike, the other kid starts riding their bike. If the adult tells them how to ride their bike, they don't listen. They're connected to their peers. They see somebody do it that they respect. They like other kids. They like playing with other kids. When they see somebody do something, they do it. And in an intuitive sense, when we're speaking honestly enough to express that absolute nature, people go, oh, I know that too. Of course, that's the way to do it. I don't have to think about it. 2 + 2 is 4. I don't have to think much about the construct of what got me to the point where I realized how mathematics worked. I don't have to go back every time and start over when I'm dealing in functional literacy, when I'm actually letting my body language tell me what I'm doing by simply witnessing the experience I'm having with the effects that I've created. So to the point of action, Mark, if the first action, and I would suggest, in my experience, every thought precedes every external action I take. I never take an action. We talk in Sobriety a lot about contrary actions. Well, contrary actions are being asked of us because we know we're still thinking contrary thoughts that are leading to actions that need forgiveness and need to be amended and need to be corrected and need to be aligned or realigned or admitted or conceded or surrendered to because they're dysfunctional. If my thinking is aligned, all of a sudden I start outwardly acting on that alignment naturally and begin saying and doing things that would have seemed impossible and incomprehensible because they become moral rather than immoral. Rather than being embarrassed about what I'm doing and hiding it, I all of a sudden have a blatant ability to express an honesty that becomes very clear and also valuable because it's a reminder and a reinforcement that we're all sharing the same natural, absolute aspect. My sense is that's what Jesus talked about. Love and forgiveness. It wasn't about hate and contempt. And I don't know that he was the only one through history, because I think there were a lot of people that didn't get a lot of notoriety who've been talking about that. So I don't want to discount and I don't want to eliminate. I want to suggest that the broadest aspect of this has probably been happening and talked about through philosophy and literature and all kinds of art and poetry. Rumi wrote about this in the 1300s. That seems like a long time ago. It's not, compared to the essence of life. It's recent. And yet, for a large part, we don't talk about this except in divisive ways and righteous ways. So I would say those ways aren't absolutely correct. They can't be. Can't be divisive if you're dealing with something that's indivisible and absolute and equitable and indiscriminate and indistinguishable. All those things are elements of our human experience, not reality and truth. Reality and truth is indistinguishable because we don't see it, we know it. The presence is absolutely always present. It doesn't require us to pay attention to it because it doesn't have any force. It isn't demanding. It isn't like humans. Love is absolute in its nature. It isn't something that takes or only gives a little bit, tortures us until we behave better. That's a petty human concept. So to think in these terms and to share in these terms is revelatory because, like Jana's experience and your admission, Mark, we met on a day that you were very distressed. And to begin to see the distress as an accurate sign, it's kind of like saying it's 20-mile-an-hour turn. If you're doing 90 miles an hour, you may not be happy to see the sign, but to continue doing 90, you're probably going to end up in the ditch. And starting to be aware that these bodily sensations we're having are actually reflecting what we're thinking gives us a chance to have some depth perception, which is what I wrote in the announcement today. It gives us a little bit of a field of depth rather than feel that we have nothing we can do about it. We have a little distance, seeming distance from it that gives us a little broader view. So thoughts manifest effects, not reality. And if we're missing the effects, we're denying the cause. And if we're treating the effects, how I feel, trying to feel better about it, trying to pretend it's not as bad as it was, so it isn't happening, and I'm not doing it because I've taken this position that I'm not going to do that anymore. And yet I'm doing it by making believe the position I've taken is so sacrosanct and so sacred that I couldn't possibly be thinking anything that's wrong, has me perpetuate wrong again in the name of thinking I'm right all over again.
It's like an actor reading the wrong lines to the play.
Yeah. Making them up as they go and wondering why the whole play
That was for
makes no
Katie's
sense.
benefit.
And the policy that
When Shakespeare said, and I said, the fools rush in where angels fear to tread.
Yeah.
It's foolish thoughts he's talking about in the head of people that think they can get away with a lie. The people in charge. He was often talking about people who were kings and big businessmen and very successful people, and they were in some way haunted by what they were doing. So most of what they were struggling with was this interior landscape of a narrative and a play, literally a screenplay that they were writing by constantly making believe they could hide behind the mask of whatever they were doing. And why angels fear to tread there is because angels don't lie. Fear is caused by the lying. Fear isn't our natural state. Fear is a clarification that something's wrong. And if we feel wrong and bad a lot, or feel disconcerted a lot, or feel irritable and restless and discontent, which are common traits of people in sobriety, it's some indication something's irritating us that we're doing, not something that's happening to us. It's we're causing it. It's the thinking. There can't be any more immediate impact on our experience as far as a human impact than our thinking, because it's exactly where pain and pleasure reside, in our brain. You can't get close enough to me to be in there to do to me what I can do in my own experience, which is why it's often said we are our greatest enemies. But the we we're talking about isn't actually who we are, but only what we think we are, rather than see that we can't be an enemy in an absolute source. Another way of looking at that is that if an absolute source is absolute, there's no choice. In addiction, no choice means continuing to do the wrong thing because we can't do anything else. In reality, no choice means you can't be condemned by having been given everything. If we already have it all, where's the condemnation in that? Where's the spite? Where's the lack? Where's the scarcity? There isn't any, none. So what have we been given? An absolute peaceful state of mind. And now we have a body that we're asked to navigate this environment through? And how well do we do in that expression? I don't do that well. I suspect I do a little better than I used to. But it doesn't mean that that reality that I'm talking about changes. It means what changes is my experience about that reality. And that's what I struggle with. Not reality and truth, but my thoughts about it. My ideas that my thoughts are right and real is what I struggle with. And that's a choice. And to make that choice consistently seems insane. And I would suggest that's exactly what insanity is. The longer I do this, the better I'm going to develop things that give me the excuse that I'm a complete victim to something happening that I started, I continued to maintain, and persisted to give it a sense of reality because it wouldn't go away while I was the one insisting it continue. Bye, sweetheart. So profound is for finding. And if what we've been looking for we've never found, it hasn't been profound. The thing we're looking for isn't profound. It's actually, we're trying to maintain the idea that we need to keep seeking it because we want to maintain the idea that we've got a secret, that we're hiding, that we can hide and never get there, never arrive. And humanity is, pretty good example of seeking and seeking and seeking and searching and searching and searching, always looking, but apparently not really looking, because what we're looking for is what we can't find, because the basis of the thinking mark is wrong. Who we are becomes, if thinking thinks of itself, it creates more thought, as you very accurately said. If I'm creating more thoughts by thinking who I am as my thinking, I think I am obsessive thinking. And what's interesting is, this happened yesterday. Laura, Alice, and Gabe and AJ took a walk yesterday morning and we talked for an hour and a half or so on Saturdays in the open air together in person. So a non-Zoom meeting, which you're all welcome to join whenever you're in or near LA, or I happen to be near you. But this comes up consistently in people I work with. They immediately think, AJ is somewhat new to the conversation, they immediately think what's being said is that they're supposed to stop thinking. And I clarify that we have been obsessively thinking so long that we think that's what thinking is. We think thinking is obsessive thinking. We don't see that thinking has another use because it's pretty much been a plague, I would say, that has threatened humanity for centuries, millennia, as long as we thought we were thinking rationally, and yet the rationale we were using was incorrect, being thought of as correct, and lived in some form of internal conflict and struggle, anxious struggle, which creates disorders. What is the disorder? I'm putting thinking ahead of reality. So disorders naturally are dis-eases. Why? It's discomforting. It's uncomfortable. So the idea that all we've been doing is obsessively thinking who we are is what we think suggests that more and more thinking saves our life while in fact it's killing our bodies. And I would suggest that we could probably easily, we're already somehow or another, despite all this, despite having suicide at an all-time high and addiction at an all-time high, I don't know if it's absolutely accurate right now, but it seems to me we may have had a slight pullback on the longevity of a life. But it's amazing we last as long as we do with all the stress we're creating. And I would imagine that lasting considerably more and being healthy considerably longer would be easy if we weren't constantly plaguing our own experience with this undermined ability to actually function, instead of constantly engaged in this absolute emergency of present traumatic stress that we're imposing as though we're running for all the time. Fear is designed to help us escape naturally, our instincts, escape, fight, flight, freeze, etc. When it comes to this form of obsessive thinking, it's an addiction, so everything goes backwards. Fighting is denying. So what's denial? Pretending the bear is not there and I feel better because the bear is not there. But since there isn't a bear there and the bear is my own thinking, I'm actually imposing on my body the same experience because my body doesn't know if it's a dream or not. I'm giving it thoughts, it's going to follow. Does what I ask. My body is at my disposal. So too is my thinking. If I'm experiencing that stuff, then fighting is denying, freezing is going numb. Fight, flight, freeze are the typical three, and then there's a fourth called fawn now that's been added to the instinctive thing. All of my instincts reverse. Fight is denial, thinking that if I pretend it's not there, it's not there. Because all I'm doing is a thought, so I don't see it like a bear, and it's not going to attack me like a bear, but internally it is attacking. And I think I'm under attack. People say, my thoughts are attacking me. My head is attacking me. My ego is attacking me. It is not. They are not. Freezing is numbness. So sentient beings that we are, in this sick form of thought, think becoming desensitized, in fact, is progress. And it may be progress, but it's kind of like helping people to get worse. It's really not the point of help, typically, when you think of help. But that's the thinking, because it's sick. So fight, freeze, flight, I can escape. What do I escape into? Compulsions. Do things outside of my body that I think are out there because I can't stand sitting still where I am. I haven't learned to simply reckon with what I'm doing, because what I've been learning is denying what I'm doing. So it constantly gets worse and more difficult. I couldn't do it when I was 2 and 3 and 4 and 5. Why would being 50 make this much easier when I've been developing a skill of pretending I'm not doing what I'm doing for 50 years, 60 years? So we run into compulsions, thinking we're escaping, we're getting away. And the interesting thing with it is the term we're getting away with it, when it comes to thinking, is actually correct, because wherever we go, the thinking goes with us. We're getting away with it. We're not getting away from it. Again, the sickness, the irony becomes clear. So fawn is to make nice. And Mark, I would suggest that you thought you were being nice to the guy to finally say yes, to finally give in, to finally agree to allow him to do what you had 200 times said no. Because it doesn't feel, when you think who you are or your thoughts, and you keep your thoughts to yourself, you don't feel nice maintaining those thoughts. You feel sort of victimized by setting limits, because you put everybody else all of a sudden seems to be attacking you and potentially putting those limits at risk. And that's what fawning is. It's the new addition to the fight, flight, freeze. Fawn means make nice. If you just talk to the bear nicely, maybe it'll calm down. Sometimes it may work. A bear that's well-fed may say, you know what, I'm not going to bother with this guy. I can't eat him anyhow. So it may work. And with people, though, that's what enabling is. And enabling is one of the core issues of addiction. And I'm suggesting that we're all addicted to any degree that we create a thought that we make believe is true that is not true. In every instance, we seem to create this cycle that doesn't end. It's a vicious cycle that we keep riding, thinking we can hide it and ignore it because we're embarrassed to have to do it. We're ashamed and guilty for it. We're embarrassed to continue it. And so we continue. So enabling is the idea that I help you, co-conspirators, Janet brings up a lot. I help you by thinking if you go along with what I think and I go along with what you think, I've made nice, when in fact I'm helping you get worse because I'm maintaining the same sick thinking you're maintaining now in a way that we both agree on, and think that somehow we've created security because now we're friends, and find almost inevitably we're betrayed, because the betrayal isn't in the friend not doing what they agreed to. The betrayal is in thinking the thought is real enough to insist anyone else operate on the basis of, for the sake of our safety. That's the betrayal, because we're betraying our complete essence in reality and existence.
I want to say that, yes, I wanted to help my friend out. But I also, at the time, was thinking, well, maybe my thinking isn't, what I want isn't correct. God is putting this in my life at this time, and just do it.
Now let's look at that, because I would say if you look at those words as accurate, think of how our circumstances, we are creating opportunity for us to concede the thing we don't think we're doing. Think of what you just said. This was put here for a reason. God gave me this now. All of a sudden, you're becoming aware that the consequences are actually giving you an absolute, clear view of what you are thinking. Follow?
Not necessarily.
So repeat what you just said about that thinking you did.
I was saying that at the time, I was thinking, again, and it's thought,
Yes.
but that again, that God is putting this in my life right now, and what I think I need isn't correct or whatever, and I just need to be present and have faith and do this.
Okay.
I mean,
let's say, Mark, if
I'm listening.
If we take the story aside and use the words you just described as an accurate indication of your own awareness of what you're doing in thinking, forget about the other person now. You're thinking incorrectly to think you have to have God reveal to you honesty and truth. Because why would that be? You know the truth. You know a knowing God. You know a knowing presence. You know an absolute truth and reality. But we get stuck in the story thinking it's the thing that happened that's the problem with the person it happened with, rather than say, no, this is actually an accurate indication of my own thinking. I think I'm incorrect, you said. You are. You are. The idea that your limits are real and true has you think your life depends on maintaining those limits. 200 times you said no, and finally gave way. The giving way gave you a chance to actually realize those limits aren't real anyhow. They're just imagined. They're decisions we make. They're conclusions we come to. When we think the conclusions are conclusive, we forget that our thinking is changing all the time. And where we are in space is constantly changing all the time within our relative human experience. But our absolute state of being isn't moving at all. It's current, and it's a current of newness, new possibility, always possible, everything, always possible, always conscious, always aware. So if the words you're using, my contention is the words we use to assign to the stories we tell, if we turn them around and start seeing them as what we're doing and thinking, I'm incorrect. I think I'm incorrect. Maybe I can correct it by giving the guy some leeway. It's not about the guy. It's about the idea you have that those limits define you. And your awareness that God is giving you the option of seeing this clearly, so you have no obligation to continue. Because in the absolute sense, if that's the truth, it's always going to be the truth. It's not some temporary thing that fixes the one problem so you can go create it again as though it's new. You're perfectly free to create it again, but once you do, you'll say, this is the same thing I did before. People say it's the same old shit. Why is it shit? It's a waste product. It has no value. It's already taken. Everything from it has been taken that's of use, and it's a byproduct to be vacated, evacuated. So if thinking is a primary action, the correction is made in the thinking, not because reality and truth are not real and true, but because our thinking about them is inaccurate. And our thinking about our own experience is inaccurate. And our thinking about our own seeming life is inaccurate. And the idea that we're abusing ourself is helping ourself to the idea there's a self to abuse, when all it is thinking of itself. We're in a loop of thought. That's it. So God, if there's a God, I'm not saying there is. Everybody gets to try this on their own and decide for themselves, because nobody's going to listen to me if I tell them to. Because ultimately, we're free to make a choice. Each one of us. That freedom also gives us the freedom to deny, to fight, to resist, to react, to defend, to pretend it isn't happening while it's happening. Think of the idea that we shouldn't be doing what we're doing while we're doing what we're doing, and not notice that if we're doing what we're doing, it may be worth conceding we're doing what we're doing before we start thinking about what we should be doing. At least it aligns us with what we're doing. rather than has us immediately maligned with this idea that we shouldn't be doing it and then wonder why it's hard to stop. Because we're repeating it, we're fighting it. There's no win in a fight, a mental fight. There's actually no win in physical fights. We haven't won the wars yet to be warless as a species. We just keep repeating it over and over and over again, and don't get that maybe something's flawed in the underlying thinking that goes into it. And that starts with you, it starts with me, it starts with us. The majority of people on the planet are not running the governments.
So if I was to say, Jack, I know who I am. I'm Anthony, and I know who I am. Is there a fallacy in that? That I don't really actually know who I am?
As the investigation continues, stressing no one should be drawing conclusions.
Is there a TV on?
Yeah, sorry.
So Anthony, you answer that. We've gone over this enough with you.
Arab American and Muslim.
I don't know.
Well, what if you do know?
I just don't want to tell you.
Yeah. What if you just think you don't know and know? Because if a knowing nature is a knowing nature and it's absolute, it's impossible we don't know. It doesn't mean we think we know, because it's the thinking that's been the problem. It's our misuse of thought. So
I guess that's the hard part, is not really knowing who you are. When do you really know who you are? Do you ever really know who you are?
Well, if you're in a quandary, if you are, let's just start there. Are you?
Yeah.
Okay. So wouldn't that be a knowing nature? Simply, I said earlier, if you can ask the question, you're admitting the existence. You're admitting your existence in the query. The problem is most of our questions are questionable, which keeps the seeking and thinking we never find, because we want to justify the idea that we can be not doing what we're doing. While we're doing what we're doing and thinking we're not doing what we're doing, we go off on this endless search because we're not admitting we are where we are. So who would you be in that are, but who you are now? And my suspicion, I don't know. I mean, I say I don't know. I don't know that my thinking is clear about it in every respect, but my suspicion is that that thing that we are is the same for all of us. We may have some distinguishing characteristics in between this physical life we're living that seems to be distinct, but it may just be that absolute infinite source, since it can't vary, and it can't be some and not all, and it can't be for some and not for all, may be exactly what we all share and what unity is, in fact. And uniform. Think of uniform compared to formlessness or reshaping or reforming or deforming and all that kind of stuff. Uniform is beginning to align everything with everything. Which is probably why the military wears uniforms, because they think within the concept of the fighting group, they're uniformed. Not recognizing that the divisiveness between the warring people wearing different costumes just signifies an idea that we can be separate and alone and apart. So, Anthony, you struggle like your father did when he came and talked with the concept of a God. And just keep in mind that God is a word that we use. God probably does not wear a name tag. God probably does not swagger around with a big attitude. But it may well be an absolute state of consciousness that is the essence of existence and life, and exactly where we always are in totality. And the question is, why do we think we're not? And I would suggest it's a sick form of insanity, making believe that who we are is what we think, and as a result, all we are is what we think, and we fight to defend those ideas, and those limits, Mark, become indicative of the idea that we can finally have people respect us by not respecting our own actual reality, by thinking who we are is limited And that when we set a boundary, if people don't respect it, they don't respect us, and we can't have anything to do with them. When we are so sick of coming up using that idea in our own experience, that we're just waiting for somebody else to blame and fault. We're looking for them. We're on the hunt. Who's going to be the dupe? Because I'm certainly not. If I can't even admit I'm doing what I'm doing in the present, what's the chance I'm going to come to terms with what I'm doing in relation to other people and other things? If the most obvious thing that's happening I act oblivious to, I'm gonna do some pretty obvious things that are ignorant. Because ignoring is at the center of my ability to defend and to deny and defy and all of the other tendencies that come with addiction. Defy, deny, defend, all of them.
I don't know. This time,
Delusion.
you know, like I'm somewhat amazed. I'm not gonna say that I have it. I haven't really picked up a real resentment towards this person.
You haven't picked up a real one? Do you have any false ones you picked up?
I mean, yes, because I mean, it's.
Think of
I
it.
can tell you that
None of them are real,
I
Mark.
haven't had that victim thought in my head. But
no,
you've
been beating the hell out of yourself over it, not him. You think that
Correct.
Doesn't convey to your experience with him? You think you're isolated, and the fact that you've been demoralized by it doesn't have an impact on everyone? We think we have no influence. We influence everything all the time, constantly.
Which influences everybody.
Exactly.
Everybody's experience, everybody's reality.
Well, I wouldn't say it's their reality. I would say it's their thinking about reality that you are influencing. We're under the influence of thinking lies are reality. That's an intoxication with insanity. It's exactly what thinking you can't stop drinking, thinking you can't stop drugging. It becomes the cure. And what it is actually creating the problem. It's helping maintain the problem. It's a cover. So if we stop doing that and start seeing the mental aspect of it, you start to see how we're covering up what we're actually doing and thinking to make it look like we're not quite doing it. It's not a real resentment. It's a fake resentment that I'm carrying. It's not a big one. It's not as big as the biggest one I've ever had, so it doesn't count. But I would suggest to you, again, bringing it back to what we're doing here, the resentment is in your own thinking about what you're doing, not what he's doing, not what you did with him, not the story we tell to try to divest ourselves from the immediacy of our own creation of it, because it's what we're thinking right now that's causing the effects we're experiencing largely. And you know what we do when we're preoccupied by those? Ignore the natural knowingness, the natural awareness, the natural intuition that would be having us so inspired and interacting on levels that were so functionally abundant that we would be thrilled to give everything we're doing away all the time, because we'd realize how helpful it is to everyone, in real help, not in, let me see if I can help you get worse by patting you on the back and telling you you're okay when you're actually struggling, rather than say, I can see you're struggling. If you ever want to talk about it, let me know. I've gone through some mental problems myself. And actually open up, have the conversation with the people we think are least likely to listen, because I guarantee you, when you start thinking they may listen, they're going to listen differently than you ever imagined. If we can create the problem and it's based in insanity, we could be pretty good at sanity. We could probably be remarkably good at something that's natural, because it isn't even a construct of thought. Now it's simply an expression of a knowing nature. It's what intuition is knowledge beyond reason. There's no understanding and no thinking involved. For our experience, understanding is how we see what eyes can't see. Eyes see forms. We have opinion about how people look, how they walk, what they do, because we're looking at them. But if our understanding, think of understanding and substance, they're both foundations. Understanding, what is that? Beneath my feet, the positions I take. What is substance? Sub to my stance, below my stance, foundation. If my understanding is accurate, then I can see substance where I would otherwise dismiss it based on what I see it visually. I can remember that I've never seen behind my eyes, and yet it's behind my eyes where all these miraculously developed connections tell my brain what I'm seeing, so that I have some cognitive awareness of what's happening around me in terms of the shapes and sizes and colors that I witness. So understanding, if we're misunderstanding the basic nature of life and our human experience, at the most fundamental level, thinking who we are is only what we think. It is like putting your hands over your eyes. Your hands don't have to be as big as the world, but both of them can cover your eyes and you can't see anything at all. We're not seeing straight in our own experience. We're not thinking straight. When we make believe these things that we're experiencing that are disturbing are any more than a road sign or body language saying something you're doing is disturbing. It's not right. And most of my life, I've lived always thinking there's something about to go wrong. And I've come to terms with the fact that it's not about to go wrong. It's wrong now if I'm thinking things that aren't right. So I don't have to stop doing that to come to terms with what I'm doing and be at peace with it, even while it's happening. And Jana, to one of your points, the idea that we have to stop, it sort of happens naturally when we start realizing we're the ones starting it, rather than thinking of it as something we need to stop. And again, we're treating the effects rather than the cause. It starts to dissipate naturally, but it doesn't mean we're not doing it at some level that seems subconscious or we're not aware of. Because there's a lot right now. If everything's always new, we're always facing things for the first time. And if our awareness is much greater than we think, we're probably aware of things we've never been aware of. So it may be somewhat confounding to recognize that you're actually aware of some threat that's lurking in the bushes before you see it. And that you have that awareness, and that you're aware of people suffering, and you're aware of the depression and the sadness and all those things, the grieving. We're aware of it. And we try by ignoring our own to deny others by blaming them and faulting them and keeping away from them. And it ends up causing more grief for us because we know we're absolutely connected and we're denying them by denying our own experience. It's very sad. I agree, Lenses.
I understand that point very, very well. Very well. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I realized my mother died when I was 15. I'd acted as a teenager like I didn't care. For 10 years after that, I acted like she was better off because she wasn't in pain anymore. Took till I was 26 to simply admit that I missed her. And once I did, I started to cry. I was on the freeway. And I got off the next on-ramp because I couldn't drive. I was literally just pouring tears and couldn't see. Sat in the park for 3 hours and just let it go for the first time. So I'd been dishonest for a long time. My body was under enormous stress. But when I admitted it and was relieved of that and came to terms with the fact that I absolutely always loved her and that I had behaved horribly in relation to her and just came to terms with it, knowing it's done, it's over, but I can still have a relation with her, I began to realize that even after she died, I'd had a witness, an experience of her and a conversation with her that had been much more productive than the one I had when she was alive. So here's the beautiful irony of that day I spent. The next day, I had 8 bowel movements.
Wow.
My body had been so tight. And then I realized what being full of shit was. Literally, the depression, the constriction, the resistance had constricted my ability to even function, my body. That's what disease is based on.
Yeah.
It's a dysfunctional feeling or a dysfunctional experience where we're actually continuing to maintain the dysfunction and thinking nobody notices, when in fact it's our body that's suffering more than anyone else. And yet when we begin to see everyone else is also suffering, we're actually contributing to the ideas they have that are wrong by making believe it's the only thing we can do, and that we need to hide it, rather than say, you know what, it's on full view. I could see in your face as I was talking about that, some of your experience of those situations. And we're on Zoom, so we don't have the immediacy of seeming connection, but we have an absolute connection regardless of the imagery that we're using to project that.
Yeah. And Jack, I want to share something very beautiful.
Please.
I am so happy to be here in this meeting, because one thing that I noticed is the love that you have for everyone. That is the connection that I feel, because I feel accepted. I feel like you know me for all these years, and I feel like this. And I told Anthony, that is why I love this meeting, and it's important for me, this meeting, because I feel this. I feel welcome. I feel love. And I had experiences being rejected and being around those people with a mentality of so much negativity, pushing me always out. And this meeting is beautiful for me to have you, to have Anthony, and to have all these other beautiful people here. And I feel at home. I feel this. It's beautiful. I feel
So let me
welcome.
I'm going to give you credit where it's due. Normally, when I'm wrong, I take credit that's undue, because I want to take credit for what I'm not doing in the name of trying to do something that's really big to distract from the thing I'm doing that isn't big at all. So your ability to see that has less to do with what I'm doing and more to do with, Anthony, who you are in your essence and your own awareness, and starting to come to terms with it and see it. When we're a little more busy thinking about things absolute and real, our thinking that is constantly being repeated, that's obsessive, starts to dissipate naturally. And what happens is the awareness becomes clear. And I suspect you've had that experience. If you weren't capable and you weren't able and you didn't know, that wouldn't happen.
Yes.
So it's your own witness of your own experience that you're starting to be fulfilled by. And I'm happy to have you use me as your excuse. And I appreciate it. But it's
Because it's
also a
beautiful.
confirmation. It's a confirmation of that beauty and that absolute knowing. It really is. So
Yes.
in speaking
Yes.
about it, it becomes obvious, rather than in constantly thinking that we need to keep fixing the thing that we constantly keep breaking. That's what obsessive thinking is. Now, my sense is it's a lot more natural to think naturally than it is to perfect unnatural thinking. We've been trying through history to perfect unnatural thinking, rather than concede that if nature is nature, it must be our human nature, period. It puts aside all of that other mythology and superstition and cultural ideas that seem to be so critical to our history, and yet they're critical of our present, to the degree that we can't seem to simply acknowledge each other honestly and openly and say, I know I love you. I just don't always think I like what you're doing.
Yes.
You know? So my sense is love is indivisible, but like is a choice. It's a preference, something we decide.
Yes.
So it's within thinking. It's not within reality.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm at least thinking I'm thinking what I'm thinking, I'm beginning to align with reality in the greater sense, because I'm not creating this tiny little bubble that I think I'm stuck in, when in fact it's all contrived. It's all just developed by this idea that who I am is what I think. So I really appreciate it. I can see it in your face, and I saw it as I was talking. You lit up a little bit, and you also there's some grief there. What I realized with my father, when he died at 86, my mother was 40. But I realized when he died, a couple of things about death that are very interesting. It seemed to me that I had a clearer relationship with my mother once she died, because I wasn't preoccupied with the physical things she was doing that bothered me. So I was so invested in the physicality and the sensory interaction that I wasn't thinking from an essential basis. And she was a very devout Christian Scientist who talked about the infinite and absolute and all these things. And I was fascinated by a certain aspect of it, but I didn't particularly like the culture that I found within the religious aspect of it. So I had issues, right? Choices I made. And when my father died at 86, now he's 46 years older, it was even harder. I thought it would be easier because he lasted longer, and I had that sort of tearing of, I don't get to see him anymore. When he died, I said I would love to be irritated by him today, by something he did that I didn't like. And I realized how shallow I am in my own thinking about things to make believe that simply because I don't like something, that I don't like that person, when it's the persona that I'm struggling with of my own. It's my own characteristics. It's my own persona, my own ideas, my own make-believe, my own makeup that I'm struggling with, not them. And so I realized that the real tribute of death is realizing that if we learn anything, it's that we have the capacity to express this to everyone who's still alive. We don't have to wait for people to die any more than we have to wait to review our life. You know how people say you see your life go before you die? Why not look at it now? It's the whole thing we're experiencing right now, acting as though we're not. So I would say that would be invigorating and inspirational and actually awe-inspired, because now we're actually looking at something awesome. Think of that too. We think of awful as full, but awesome is some, not all. So real awe is the fullness of awareness and the fullness of appreciation and the fullness of the great fullness, the fullness of greatness of this essence that's natural, that we all share, that nature shares. It's trying to support us while we're attacking it, thinking that if we can overcome nature, we'll solve our problems, while the problems we're creating that create the insecurity are the ideas we have that we need to fight, rather than actually align and include and become reckoning with the actual totality of our existence in total, not in parts and pieces, and thinking that's all that there is.
Yes, it's very interesting because many years ago, I didn't know this until my father passes away. He was fighting skin cancer, and when my dad passes away, they call me and they say, "Oh, Lensis, that is, he passes away." And I was in shock literally, because no one told me what was going on. Just in the last minute, it was late. And I said, well, he is dead. So, okay, I had nothing to do with this situation. It was very painful for me.
Yes.
To be treated that way. Like, why they did this? I understand why, but it was shocking because no one told me, hey, Lindsay, my dad is fighting cancer and he's almost passes away. Call him or talk with him and say something to him to say bye or something. No, they didn't tell me anything. And it's like, okay, well, he knows that I love him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And still do. And he is still available to love, and he is loving you. That persona may disappear in a body, but the essence of that body has not disappeared at all. The molecules, the atoms, everything that made that body up still exist in the universe, much less the spirit that was never a body to begin with has never changed from what it was while we were there. And that's a point that I expect is worth noting here. Something that's interesting, I did a little study during COVID about near-death experiences, is that people who have those experiences have very profound spiritual experiences, and almost to a person don't want to come back into their bodies. They're appalled when it's time to come back. And yet we live as though the greatest loss would be our body, when in fact we're living with a body that has the capacity of fulfillment in every spiritual respect, while we're constantly trying to fight what we're doing and making believe that the weight of our existence is just life is a struggle and life is hard and life is complicated, when it's the thinking we're doing that's struggling and hard and complicated. It isn't life. It's what we're doing as though it's life because we think it's ours. So another thing to think about when it comes to expectations, and I know how easy it is to be shocked by circumstances that you don't expect, as though expecting them would make it easier, right? The shock may not be
Yeah.
severe, but if the present state of being and awareness and knowing is infinite, then everything that's possible is always possible. And as you become to realize that that's what the moment is, that's what the present is, everything's possible. Well, that certainly is a lot different than thinking the only thing possible is to keep redoing the thing we've always done because it defines us and because it is who we are. And we start insisting on this stuff. That isn't all possibility. That's one possibility that we've decided happens to be who we are. How small can that be when you're relating it to an infinite source? It means we've chosen the least in the name of the most and given up the most in the name of the least. It's crazy. So if all possibility is always possible, it becomes obvious our bodies are designed to deform, disintegrate. That's a natural process. It's probably not scary to anybody who goes through it. And there's a guy named Dr. Christopher Kerr that I came across and listened to who has sat with 1,000 people who have died. And he said very often as people come to terms with what they're actually facing and people aren't trying to hide it and give them morphine to avoid it, they end up consoling the family and friends that are sitting around their bed as they die. The person dying consoles the people who are sad and grieving and mourning the loss that they are ready to face. It's interesting.
That's very interesting, Jack, how we can process grief, because every loss is a grief and we need to pass that process, but how we can process that grief,
I think we use circumstances and the stories about circumstances as excuses to, again, divest ourselves from the experience that we're grieving and mourning right now by making believe all we are is what we think. What greater loss could we have than to imagine we don't belong where we are, that we can never get what we want, and constantly live in that false opinion? Now, that would be traumatic stress. That would be mourning and grieving and sad all the time.
Exactly.
And I would say we're overlooking nature by blaming it for causing the grief because someone dies when dying is natural. And we are now committing to death. We have death wishes in our present by diminishing our capacity as humans to give the bountiful nature of the loving source that we have always had and always will have, and actually always are, Anthony, to your question. It's our nature. It's the nature of all animals, the nature of all things. Animals know what to do to survive. It looks vicious to us and unkind, but the food chain, we eat off of the food chain as a form of physical survival. The plants don't argue with us cutting them down and cooking them. They cooperate beautifully and provide us the vegetables we need, et cetera, as do the animals to a degree. Whether that's right or wrong, I don't know. They're here. They seem to eat each other. I can't imagine that the impossibility of us not doing it is somehow, turns us into sacred beings when we're already sacred. So my sense is that we seem to miss the moment. We seem to be not in the moment. We seem to be disconnected by the moment. How much further could we be from absolute reality than thinking we aren't where we are while we're always where we are, thinking we're not where we are? It's crazy. We're always there. We can't even think about not being here if we weren't here. So that's the grief in our own experience is the lack of fulfillment of trying to take something that doesn't exist and create reality out of it, while in fact we're preoccupied with denying the potential we have to share the reality that we all share and have everyone confirm, like you just did in witnessing what you witnessed, and sharing that in that way was a very bountiful statement. Very effusive and very generous. But it's a reminder of the connectedness. You put your hands together, which people can't see, and held them in the unity, in that awareness, that connectedness. That's the state of our natural existence. It does not go away when we think it isn't there, any more than the world goes away when we cover our eyes or play peekaboo. As kids, we thought it was funny. As adults, we don't think it's that funny. We've taken things that are childish seriously so long that we think who we are is an imposter and wonder why we feel fraudulent.
I still love peekaboo. I still love peekaboo.
So there's freedom in doing these things when we don't think they define us, but they're simply what we're doing. Because they're not defining us. What they're defining, by the way, Mark, going back to that point, they're defining our thinking. Words are definition of thoughts. Language is developed out of thinking. We're not thinking about the thing we're thinking of, we're thinking about the thing. To see that is to start to say, oh, I don't even have a relation to that thing. I don't have a relation to that thing that is meaningful and useful and purposeful if I only see it as what I think it is, and it isn't what I think. So what am I? I'm in a collision with it. What do I think? I got to overcome it. I got to dominate it. I've got to control it. Because it's not behaving now, when in fact the misbehavior is all on my part. So impulsive, reactive, impulsive, and compulsive behaviors are typically the behaviors that come from these ideas we have about our own reality and our own truth. It can't be our own. How could reality be mine and not yours and still be real? I mean, even on its face, that doesn't make any sense. If it's real for me and not real for you, that means it isn't real. If it's true for me and not true for you, it isn't true. So to begin to recognize the absolute state of being isn't some theoretical, philosophical conversation, and it isn't complex. As a matter of fact, it's so simple that it never changes, ever. Why? Because it's always present. It isn't somewhere else. It isn't something that takes forever to come to. It's present now. It's here, always. And it's only here to humans because we have bodies that we think of locationally because we're operating in this time and space seeming dimension. Remember with peekaboo, Jackie?
Yeah.
Wasn't the boo always designed to scare someone? Maybe other than boo-hoo, but people used to say boo. So peekaboo, it can be shocking to see what we thought wasn't there. And yet the real shock is the absorption. The shock absorber is the time we spend making believe it's true, and it just assimilates tension in our body. It's always happening in the present, but it's compounded by constantly maintaining an idea that begins to store a charge of stiff energy in our muscles that get stiff. They begin to constrict. Pressure comes from that. Stress, anxiety. And it's almost consistent in all diagnoses that it's mentioned that stress is the leading cause of all of these diseases. And yet, what do? We treat the symptoms. We try to feel better about it. We try to figure out how to get away from it by solving it in some way where it doesn't feel like what's happening is happening while it continues to happen. We're not thinking about our thinking as being the sole source of this cause. If we're thinking incorrectly and thinking it's right, that's a major conflict in our capacity to function and to be inclusive. It turns everything seemingly backward in our thinking. We become victims. We become irresponsible. We don't want anything to do with anyone or anything else, or to some degree, and then wonder why we can't come up with a solution and think it's impossible. We're setting impossibility off by making believe we're not responsible, by making believe it has nothing to do with us, by making believe we're victims, by making believe we can even be victims and hurt by others rather than actually witness the hurt we're creating. We can't get closer to our own ability to cause havoc in our own system than to claim what we're doing isn't what we're doing simultaneously. There's no closer impact than our pain and pleasure zones reside exactly where our thinking occurs.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So thought manifests effects. If we're witnessing the effects and starting to live with them as good information, body language, signs, alert systems, alarms. We'll start valuing the incredible ability we have to even have an experience that's accurately assessing what we're thinking rather than who we think we are and all we think we can do. It starts to actually align us, and the natural alignment does not create further conflict and further stress. So there's a little perspective and awareness of, oh, there's other options here. And I'm going to suggest that principles always offer us the freedom not to practice them, and yet they remain in place, perfectly in place all the time. And like choice, we say we have no other choice. It's impossible not to have any other choice, because the whole point of choice is that we have no obligation to choose. None. So if we're choosing and we're experiencing, it's based on choice. If we decided not to think about anything, and that was possible, we wouldn't have any opinions about anything. But we have thinking, and thinking is judging. It isn't something we shouldn't do. It's something we absolutely do. And the only time it turns into contempt is when I think it's true. When I think my judgment is true, I think you're the asshole. I think you're the person that's wrong, rather than seeing it's my own judgment that's causing that. My own opinion of it being reality that I'm seeing that's causing that. It's my wrong that's causing the opinion to escape, because addiction reverses everything, turns it all around. It makes it you and not me. Makes it everyone and not me. So I clearly can admit everyone else is responsible, and yet at the same time think I have no influence over everyone else. Pretty clever in a sick way.
I like when we were talking a while ago and I said, I'll take even though it's not my fault, I'm going to take 50% responsibility for that just because I was there. And you're like, no, it's 100%. So I don't know how it gets to 100% actually, but because
when something's absolute, Anthony, it's 100%. Think about a pizza that's 100%, that's absolute. You could just keep eating it. In AA, there's paradoxes, right? You're aware of the paradoxes. We give it away. Think of that. How could we constantly give it away and keep it if it weren't an infinite source that we're giving away?
Yeah.
What are we sharing? What everyone else already has. What are we sharing with them? Affirmative thoughts that allow them to begin to see and witness that knowing nature that gives them the freedom to begin to exercise choice rather than condemn them to think they have no other choice.
Surrender to win.
Surrender to win, yes. Die to live. What are we dying? The ideas I have about who I think I am die, and I all of a sudden realize, oh, who I am is who we are. And so acting on your favor becomes natural because it's acting on my favor. In my supposed favor, my bodily's favor. And I suspect if I have a body, it's like a car. I like to change my oil every 5,000 miles. I like to take care of the car. I like to keep air in the tires so the alignment's a little better and it gets better gas mileage. I like to do those things. Why wouldn't I do it with my own physical body? I've been given charge over this, like the pilot has the cockpit. He's been given charge over. If he just starts flipping switches because he can flip switches, it doesn't probably lead to a safe landing or a safe flight. For making those kind of choices randomly, thinking somehow it'll work out, and we keep praying for God to fix it, when in fact it is not God breaking it. We're once again trying to use God as an excuse to avoid what we're doing and the responsibility we absolutely have for the choices we make, and think we're waiting for God. What we're waiting on is for us to get over the idea that it's not us.
We could play peekaboo with God.
Yeah, that's what we think we're doing.
God loves peekaboo.
God won't see me.
Yeah.
Well, if that were the case, kids who were afraid would probably feel safe in the dark, which they don't seem to. And it's interesting, in the dark, kids imagine there's ghosts. Well, when it starts, you can't really tell.
Kids like to be startled. They get startled and then they laugh.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Well, again, when we grow up with childish ideas, they get stale and we get bitter rather than mature and ripen and become sweet. We're functioning on the basis of when kids are young, kids can pretend they're firemen. Nobody ever sends them out to fight a fire.
Yesterday, I teach joy at a rehab, and somehow we started talking about raccoons, and I was like, okay, we all have to, when we get back, because first I take them walking and then I teach them joy, and I was like, when we get back, we all have to take turns playing being a raccoon. And it was so fun because you were like a toddler. Like we were dying laughing. It was so funny. It was ridiculous. But it was because we were playing like children.
Right. So to that point, Jackie, if we take what we're thinking seriously enough to make believe it's reality, we don't think it's funny at all when people don't respect our reality. We don't think it's a joke at all. And you know what we're doing? We're taking a joke seriously.
Yeah.
And you being a comedian know that when you're taking a joke seriously, it is not funny.
Right.
So the freedom of laughter is like tears and actually
that's really
movements.
It's really fun for me to go it's really funny to me to go through my set and thinking everything's serious. Like I never thought of it that way. It's really funny.
Yeah. Well, and my sense is laughter is sort of laughter. You said it, Lindsay, that you were both crying and laughing simultaneously. Didn't I hear you say that?
I don't remember.
I think it was Jana talking about when she called you.
Oh, yeah.
Her.
Yes, it was Jana. So she was talking about sort of the release of having the laughter. And the interesting thing about tears is we normally think of them as sad, and yet awe-inspired awareness will create tears too, just out of the absolute wonder of appreciation and gratefulness. And it's almost like wringing all of that self-pity out of a wet rag in our body, where it turns from being sad tears, melting of an iceberg, to being just the abundance of warmth and essence. And beginning to witness it is pretty profound. Literally, for finding becomes easy because we're looking for it. We're not looking against it. We're not trying to pretend it isn't there. We're not playing, thinking our eyes are that because we cover our eyes, it's not happening, or we turn our back and it's not going to continue. So part of my experience is that the most important part of the week is not the time we spend together, not to diminish it, but the time we each have in what we call our own lives to begin to actually apply these thoughts and see what happens, like literally begin to just entertain them, live with them. And my sense is when anything is said that has any merit, we tend to consider it even if we're fighting it. We tend to notice that the fight is kind of a thin veil because it's maybe worth considering a little differently than we normally treat things. There tends to be somewhat of an awakened growth in that and such. And I'm not suggesting I say things clearly enough to have that happen, but I'm suggesting that if you know those things, if there's anything said anywhere near that, you know that you know. And you start being aware that you're aware. And you start noticing the thoughts differently because you begin to realize you're actually watching them, and you can't be something you're watching any more than you can be what you're doing. But you can do what you're doing in your human experience, and you can see what you're doing in your human experience, and you can begin to use understanding as the foundation of your experience by beginning to entertain thoughts as fundamental as possible, rather than make the fundamental thought, all I am is what I think, and all things are is what I think of them. When that's the fundamental basis of my thinking, I have absolutely given myself an experience that I'm completely detached from reality. There can be no greater fear than imagining being out in space, completely alone, with no hope of reconnection whatsoever. We struggle locally in the midst of other people with loneliness. How would it be to actually be locked in a box somewhere in the middle of the desert where you know nobody knows where you are and can't come to find you. That would be pretty horrifying. And yet we do it in our own experience, making believe that if we overcome it, if we can suffer it and overcome it, that we've conquered the fear, when in fact we're creating the fear because we're never apart, we're never alone. There is no division between something that's infinitely connected, because there aren't any parts or pieces. It's perfect symmetry. It's absolute balance, because there can't be any balance. There is no balance in it. It's just a natural, absolute state of consciousness. It's unalterable, unfaltering. It doesn't come or go. It isn't less or more. That's our nature, and we're not talking about it in those terms. We are going to falter under the ideas and the weight of the ideas we have that have no basis whatsoever, but feel very heavy to us, which should be a sign that something's depressing about what we're thinking. That heaviness and that weightiness is exactly what depression is. And to think it's happening to us is to think we have nothing to do with it. And as a result, it continues and it grows, and we think we're greater victims to it as a result. To prove it, to prove the sickness. To take insanity seriously as anything other than fantasy imagined to be real is also a mistake. And I would say this contests the whole basis of psychology and medical science, but I'm not afraid to speak to those things. I'm not licensed. I'm not a doctorate, and I'm not telling anyone not to do what they're doing with respect to those things, or they shouldn't be doing what they're doing. If things help them, it's probably better to get help than become more and more desperate and kill yourself, I would suggest. At the same time, if we're taking it so seriously to think of it as something distinct from what we're choosing, we're actually treating it as though it has life, when in fact it's fantasy being seen as reality. It's an illusion. It's a developed sickness that may be hereditary to a degree, because genes are constantly changing. DNA is constantly adapting to the environment. If we're creating a sick environment and our own toxic experience, our DNA is trying to make sense out of what to do, while what it's adjusting to makes no sense. So it's going to develop things that would mimic the same insanity that it's experiencing and try to conquer it at the same time. Our body has a chemical factory that is more developed than any factory on earth with respect to chemicals. And if we're thinking accurately, my suspicion, again, I'm going out on a limb, but I don't think it's too far out on a limb, our chemical factory would start correcting naturally if we weren't constantly undermining its ability to function. And ending up dysfunctioning, thinking that we needed to overcome the dysfunction, rather than recognize we keep restarting the dysfunction by thinking we have to stop it, rather than be responsible and admit that we're actually restarting it over and over and over again. Mm-hmm. Our life isn't limited to what we do, but also the descendants and all the others that are out there, everyone. The better we each are, the better everyone gets, because it takes stress from the body. It allows the body to function naturally, ably, healthfully. And that means every successive generation begins to inherit DNA that hasn't been under an imposed stress, a fantasy as reality, and starts to deal with reality as reality and starts functioning to our full capacity, which would be a very loving planet, treating nature and treating each other as natural, respectable assets, because we respect our own experience, we respect everyone else's simultaneously. Wouldn't be a stretch at all. It wouldn't be hard at all. And to think it's impossible is more of the same sick thinking, imagining that we're not already having the influence we're having on everyone everywhere right now by maintaining ideas that aren't true. The impossibility is in thinking, not in reality, because reality is the totality of all possibilities, which includes thinking impossibility is possible. So that shows how much love we've been given to even be able to think the most absurd thing is possible. That's freedom.
Yes. Wow. This is amazing. Oh wow, this is so amazing. It feels like therapy or more than that. It's so beautiful. This energy, everything what is going on now is so beautiful.
Well,
it's beautiful.
Imagine your awareness is witnessing your awareness. That's beautiful. It isn't destructive. It isn't disintegrative. It isn't disrespectful. It isn't hateful, spiteful, contemptful, argumentative. None of it. It's just an abundant, absolute, blissful state.
Yes.
Now, it doesn't mean when we make choices to do things that we're going to run into people that just say, that's beautiful. That's all I want to do. We're going to have experiences, but having a challenge is a challenge.
It's a great feeling too when everything's so crystal clear and exciting and everything's good. But then for me, I found it goes the other way where you look at something going, man, I've been carrying this around for a long time and nobody really cares that I've been carrying it around, just me. Or you feel like I felt like I wasted a lot of time. That was the eye-opening part where
But think of your comments, Anthony. It's eye-opening because you're starting to see what you're doing and the impact what your thinking is having. So it isn't a waste of time. It's a waste of time to think right now that something that isn't happening is all that's happening. That's the waste.
Yeah.
Because you know what's happening now? Everything. Everything, everywhere. And you know what we are? Part of what's happening. And we're not apart from it. We're absolutely intimately combined as bodies. Even in our human experience, we're intimately a part of it all.
The clarity is great when you can see really well, but then when you look at yourself, it's like, this is too clear now.
Well,
there's no camouflage.
That self you're looking at is only your thought thinking of itself, and you think it's who you are. That's the fatal error right there. That's what causes us to be afraid of death, while in fact we're killing ourselves in the present and not noticing it, ignoring it. It's actually a death wish to make believe those thoughts are true. They're suicidal tendencies built into our daily experience, wondering why we feel so happy to get little wins here and there, rather than major wins and say, I got no problems at all. And I can create all kinds of problems. And I actually relish in the opportunity to resolve them and show others how simple it can be. And I don't mean resolve in the resolve. I mean in the dissolution of the illusion. We couldn't be disillusioned if it weren't an illusion we were disillusioned over. When we start seeing it's just literally an imagery that we create in our thinking, that we have a narrative to go with, it's no more than that. We are beings by nature. We are absolute by nature. Each of us and every one of us. And to your point, Anthony, 100% of everything that's indivisible is always 100% of everything. Because it is as it is. It happens to be where everything else happens to be too. Because it isn't based in space and time, it can't not be where things are. It can't be missing in action. We can't grieve or mourn its loss because there is no loss in it whatsoever. And nor is there anything to be found because it can't be lost. It's starting to just consider that if this is the absolute state of our awareness, and I would say we couldn't even think about it if it wasn't. And the question is, what is the difference when we start thinking about sick things? We create misery and dysfunction and sickness and disease and overdoses and suicide. Maybe that isn't instinctive. Maybe that's instincts in backward, going in reverse, addiction. And the other direction, if that direction exists, the other direction would be abundance, expansion, constant ability to see more, experience more in our own human experience, not waiting for this ultimate experience to end, but realizing that ultimate experience that seems to only happen when our bodies die is here presently now. And we are simply pretending it isn't by making believe all we are is what we think. That alignment is natural. It isn't some phenomenon that's hard to get. It's actually the easiest thing because we've had it the whole time. We've been making believe we didn't.
And I always think if you just get your thinking right, then everything's going to work out. If I just think about it the right way,
what you think is that if you get your sick thinking right, it'll all be okay. That's the difference. No, that's what obsession is, Anthony. It's thinking the more I do the thing that's causing the problem, the better the problem will get.
Yeah.
Think about it. You're trying to get a problem better.
Yeah.
It's all illusory. It's all thinking about thinking that's causing this. So, but you're accurate in terms of that transition, because I remember when we first met, all of this seemed laughable because it's kind of like the cover got blown off for you.
Yeah.
But then the struggle began with, what does that really mean to me now? And you started...
Or not being so set on my ways. Like usually I used to know I hate that. I don't like that. I love this. Now I don't really have those strong, I love this, I hate that, which is great. But it was also kind of fun to love and hate stuff.
You can love and hate anything you want. The fact is, it does not change reality and truth. They're just choices. You can go to a horror film. You can go to a comedy. You can go to a love film that's sad. You can go to a drama. You can go to all those different movies, and you can create them in your own experience, and you can manifest all the effects. Because like a dream, think of dreams. Our body doesn't know that we're not being chased by something down the hallway that seems to never end. Our body feels those things. We feel that stuff in our experience when we're having a dream. These daydreams we create are no different at all. And when they're seen as that, it takes out the seeming strength and impact of having them the way they're not. They're just illusions, imagery that we're creating with a
And I
narrative.
guess the lying helps a little too with the denial. You know, if you're denying it, you don't have to look at it. You just move on. You're passionate about things. When you really look at it accurately, it's like it's hard to be passionate about something sometimes when you realize it's just all make believe and it's really not correct, and it's just kind of upsetting.
What you're living off of when you're denying it is the body's ability to generate adrenaline and other things that gets misused and deplete your body from being available when you need it. You're creating that scenario and it feels better, just like a drug. You're creating literally a chemical cocktail in your body. That's not, you're intoxicated with your ability to manipulate your body into having you feel certain things. But the denial, Anthony, think about it. If something's real, can it be denied?
Between Lebanon and Israel, that border.
You can think you're denying it,
but not in reality.
Exactly. And that's, since we're talking about reality, we might as well start and stop there. So this whole thinking it's real and thinking we're doing it is clearly just more illusory.
Yes.
And to begin to see it that way means you can make anything up you want anytime. You never have to worry about never doing these things again that you think are fun. You can do them all the time, but I will tell you, they won't be as fun as the absolute inspiration you start to witness and the awe you'll start to witness in other people as you begin to authenticate your experience by speaking authentically and starting to see the impact that occurs, because it wakes people up to their experience. Because normally my experience has been that I was so forceful in my way that I created reactivity in others and thought that was our connection, because I wanted to maintain the sickness wasn't just me, it was everyone else too. I didn't want to feel alone in the sickness while I alone was continuing to perpetuate.
And I guess part of it goes with impressing people. Like, why would you want to impress people? Because that's important sometimes.
You're trying to get rid of the impression that you're bearing is depression in your own experience. There is no impression in reality. It's just a state of awareness. It's a free state of completely fluid awareness. There's no restrictions. There's no variation. There's no opposition. There's no start-stop. It's an
somebody asked me, he said, why do you care about impressing? Is that important to impress people? But I came back with something that I had read that, no, I like to talk to people and communicate. So if it opens up conversation, that's really what I'm interested in. Not impressing them, but having something to talk about. So that was my rationalization.
So in that little glimmer of you saying, yes, in reality, but not in my thinking, when we go back to the reality.
Yeah.
If you begin to actually look at reality as reality and start operating from that basis, you're going to be very impressed by the lack of impression you make on other people, but the weight that you relieve from them that has been impressing depression on them by noticing something's accurate. It's pretty fulfilling. It's exactly what happens in all of the 12-step programs when someone takes somebody through the steps or they work with somebody and see them get better. There's a confirmation that it's possible not only for them, but it remains possible for us because it's always possible. It's always been possible. What we've been struggling with is thinking we're alone, so we haven't been acting on it, or we've been thinking about it as though we're alone, and we haven't had the confirmation in the conversation because we haven't been having the conversation openly from an authentic point of view so that someone else says, oh, I think that same thing too. Think of the connection in talking to people openly that relieves them of thinking they're alone. That's what people kill themselves over all the time. We have suicides at an all-time high right now in almost every category, if not every category.
Yeah, when Mark was talking about a problem he was having, it made it I could relate to that. And then also it's always easy to change other people's problems. Like when he's having the same problem I'm having, I'm like, well, just don't do that anymore. What's wrong, Mark? Get it together, right? But it's always easier to tell somebody else what their problem is rather than dealing with your own problem. Because I keep doing this. I walk into the same thing and I'm beating myself up. Not so much the person for doing it or being involved, but me for always keep doing the same thing, getting to the same spot.
You know why you think you're beating yourself up, Anthony?
Because I am.
You think it proves you have a self to beat up.
Okay. That makes sense.
Isn't it interesting that you wouldn't love, people always talk about loving themselves. There's no love in a self born of fear. None. Because it's all born in thinking of itself. And then we take it to the next step and say, well, that's reality because I concluded it's reality. There's no love in it at all. It's filled with fear. Why? Because it's self-imposed, self-induced. It's induced by the thinking we're doing, about the thinking we're doing. It isn't reality and it isn't true. But it's telling us something's wrong, or we would be loving the self we were thinking of rather than abusing it and beating it up. We're actually experiencing being beaten by the thinking we're doing because it's an unwinnable, unsustainable, unattainable result. You can't win in it. It's always going to be a fight. Fights are always going to lead to more fighting. It's interesting that we talk about the person who surrenders as the loser when the person who surrenders is always the one that allows peace to prevail. So we've got it backward. Same thinking. We think the person who wins has more power. They have false sense of power because it always becomes challenged by somebody else who wants to be bigger. If we stop that in our own experience, we start becoming conduits of peace for all because they already know they're wrong to be suffering the indignation and the righteous fights that they keep feeling they need to do because they're disrespected and people don't get them and people are trying to take from them. All that kind of stuff starts to dissipate. So I love you guys. I appreciate this greatly. Lynn says I'm always available too. Know that.
Thank
you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jack. Thanks, everybody.
Yes,
Mark?
Thank you, Jack.
Let's make another lunch plan, Mark.
Absolutely.
My sweet potato.
You are a sweet potato, Janet.
Hey, aloha.
Beautiful ocean out there. See you guys.
All right. I love you guys.
Bye.
Love you too.
Bye,
Thank you.
Jack. Bye. Jack, bye. Bye.